Thank you for being here, and I'd like to start by asking your name and who you are in the community.
So I'm John Mariani. I'm an architect, urban designer. I've been practicing architecture since the 1980s, mostly in Baltimore, where I have my own practice. But I've worked in New York and Washington and Baltimore. So I'm here to talk about the Inner Harbor scheme that's been presented, and I'd like to explain why, from a design point of view, why I think it's a very bad project, the way it's designed, for the city and for the place, the Inner Harbor. So should I just launch into that?
Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts about the Inner Harbor redevelopment proposal that has 3 bills going through the Planning Commission hearing this Thursday.
Okay. So I think there's 2 problems. One is the process that others have talked about, and I think they're better than I am at talking about that. I'll talk about the design briefly. The Inner Harbor is, I think, the most important public space in Baltimore. It's to Baltimore what Central Park is to Manhattan, what the mall in Washington is to Washington. It may not be as zippy as those, but it's just as important. And the way it exists today, which is a terrific piece of urban design, didn't just happen by chance. Back in the 1960s, some planners put together what they call the Urban Renewal Plan for the Inner Harbor I think it was in '67, and they laid down some very basic urban design rules about development at the harbor. And the Inner Harbor at the time was a former working port that had been abandoned pretty much. It was obsolete, it didn't work anymore. And those planners had a vision where they thought that instead of allowing development to just occur naturally, that it would be a great place to create a public open space, a park. And the fact that the Patapsco River comes up and into the middle of the city and touches the central business district is a very unusual thing. Most cities are developed on the side of a river. Baltimore is sort of wrapping around the end of a river, which is, like I said, very unusual. And so their vision, which was let's create a park that wraps the water on 3 sides and then use buildings as a way to frame the harbor and create edges by building an assemblage of buildings on Light Street and Pratt Street, and then laying down some rules about those buildings. Like they could only be so tall, then they could step back, and then they could go higher. What that's done since the 60s has created what we have, which is this beautiful open space with a hard street wall on Light Street and Pratt, which do exactly what they had hoped. It defines the harbor, it contains it, and it's great. And no one has made the case why we should abandon the ideas. This developer has come along with this new scheme where it completely violates the rules of the road, and he has not, or his team has not explained why we should get rid of these rules and allow something completely different. And
well, can I interject and say what I've heard MCB Real Estate say? The reasons for that are, number one, that we have to have residential towers with high density right down there on the waterfront to activate the area. That's the word that they use. So there will be 24/7 activation. And the second reason that they give is that the investors are requiring that to go ahead with the project. So what's your reflection on those 2 reasons that they're giving?
Well, I would say to the developer that right now the Inner Harbor, and when you say the Inner Harbor, it's not just the open space at the water's edge, but those rows of buildings that wrap the harbor are part of the Inner Harbor. They are in the Urban Renewal Plan. Well, if you look at those buildings today, most of them are residential. We already have a lot of residential use at the harbor, right? You have the Christchurch Apartments, you have Harbor Court, you have the Hyatt Hotel, which is a type of housing, sort of. You have another hotel on Pratt. And then there's opportunities to build more at the street walls. There's an empty lot on Pratt Street that I understand the developer controls that lot, so he could build housing there. There's the building 414 Light, which is the newest building. That's all residential. The building at the corner, the PNC building, has which is an L-shaped building with a parking garage behind the L. The parking garage is literally crumbling. That could be rebuilt as an apartment tower, potentially. The building with the funky trusses that are exposed on the roof, that would be a great candidate for a conversion from office space to residential. So we could literally ring the harbor with housing if we thought that was so important. And we wouldn't need to build the housing actually in the park. It could all be, so, there's plenty of room to do that. So I reject that whole idea that we have to build in the park at the water's edge. I would argue that we can continue to build at the street wall or convert older buildings and accomplish the same thing.
And as an urban planner, and you have a master's in urban planning, correct?
Urban design.
Urban design.
It actually is a little different.
Mm-hmm. So master's in urban design, and you're a Baltimore native, so you've seen this city grow and change over the last 40 and 50 years. So as an urban designer, what is your thinking on just the concentration of buildings that's being proposed versus some of the other proposals that have come forward, like from Rebecca Hoffberger and other folks who are in even a 10-year-old Harborplace 2.0. Yeah, that features a lot of open park space that's more for the public and less for shopping and all of the things. What are your feelings on that?
Well, I think the first comment is if you saw the UDARP review, I think they used the word, it's overbuilt. We're not, they wouldn't really comment in detail about the scheme, but that word was used.
And for people who don't know what UDARP is, can you explain that?
UDARP is the design review people who work for the planning department, and this project has to be reviewed by UDARP, and it's a long process of many meetings. So his design, his scheme will change if he is able to get past the planning commission. But your comment was about the density of the housing there. Well, he purchased Harborplace. Harborplace is 2 pavilions that sit on land that we own, we the people of Baltimore. We still own that land, and those parcels were designated in the urban renewal plan in the 60s as public open space. So when Harborplace was built, it actually violated the original urban design plan, but we all voted on it. It passed barely, and it was successful. It was very successful.
Very successful. I had a store down there for 10 years, and it was amazing. Harborplace was amazing.
And many people argue that the fact that it has to be demolished and removed, well, let's see the evidence that it's a white elephant. I'm not really convinced. But if the developer says it's got to go, okay, because if you remove those 2 buildings, actually the original idea of a contiguous green space that wraps the harbor would then reappear. It would just, boom. There's the idea, the original idea, and it would strengthen the idea. By removing Harborplace, it would actually strengthen the idea of a park with the apartment buildings, backing
Do you
it
think
up.
that would bring people to Baltimore?
Well, I think that if we created a bigger park that wrapped the harbor, the park would have to be designed. Like, you wouldn't just plant grass and say, we're done. it would, you'd hire a landscape firm or firms and come up with ideas to do, a dynamic park that would definitely attract people. And then, the other branch of the Patapsco, we've just had a huge process of design. That whole waterfront's going to be designed.
What is that area called?
It's the central branch of the Patapsco. I guess it's Westport.
Westport. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the idea of designing a waterfront without buildings is something we do.
Well, thank you so much for having this discussion. I'm sure the public will appreciate your expertise and your insight.
Thank you.